What we are is really a walking, talking rainforest. We are a collection of thousands of different organisms that have to communicate effectively with one another in order to perpetuate the health of the overall species. In fact, we have over 3.3 million microbial genes in and on our system that we use to conduct almost 99% of all our biochemical functions. So what we used to think of as being human, the organ system, our DNA and our chromosomes, all of that accounts for less than 1% of who we actually are.
Welcome to the Wise Traditions Podcast, sponsored by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
I'm your host, Hilda Labrada-Gore. This is episode 69, and my guest is Kiran Krishnan. Kiran is a research microbiologist who has been studying gut health and the human microbiome for years. He earned his Bachelor of Science degrees in microbiology at the University of Iowa. Since then, he has done much graduate work and hands-on research and development in the field of molecular medicine and microbiology. Clearly, he's an expert in this field. In today's conversation, Kiran helps us gain a new understanding of the human microbiome and how it specifically relates to health and wellness. We are 10 times more bacteria than we are human, and the bacteria that live in and on us play a significant role in how our body responds to stress, food, and our environment. And Kiran wraps up our conversation with specific suggestions for how to best nurture a healthy microbiome. Before we get to the conversation, we want to thank our sponsors. Wise Traditions is supported in part by New Trends Publishing, home of nourishing traditions and other fine books on diet and health. Go to newtrendspublishing.com. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. They are currently in the midst of a discounted membership drive. This is the final week to join at the price of $30 a year for U.S. membership. Go to westonaprice.org and join today. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Kiran.
Hi, thank you so much for having me, Hilda. Great to be here.
This is such an important topic today. So many people are struggling with digestive health and complicated health issues related to that. Tell me the story you just told me a moment ago before we started recording about that 16-year-old that you encountered at the clinic.
Yeah, so this was quite compelling. Imagine being a 16 or 17-year-old child or having a 16 or 17-year-old child, and then your child is suffering from numerous bloody stools in a single day, losing weight, is practically gaunt, not growing the way that he's supposed to. And this was what this mom was suffering with. And it's not an uncommon issue. The child was suffering from a form of colitis. And colitis, of course, is becoming more and more common now in the western part of the world, including the United States. And basically, it's an inflammation of the intestinal tract that's happening. And we could talk about why that is. But to delve into his story a little bit more, he was actually gotten to a point where it was so bad, he had a GI doc that had scheduled him to have about 18 inches of his intestinal tract removed. And about 3 weeks before that scheduled surgery, he had come into the clinic that we work with, and we started him on the right probiotic, made some other changes in his dietary system, and basically at that 3-week mark went back to the GI doc and said, hey, I'm not experiencing the bloody stools anymore. Things are getting better. Can we take a look at this? And the doc said, hey, things are looking much better. Let's put off the surgery and see how things go. And, that same child is about 20, 21 years old right now, graduating college. Had put on about 30 pounds of muscle after that. It's back to a completely normal life. And that's just by adding a probiotic and making a few dietary changes. And the colitis was kept at bay. So it was really a phenomenal story because, once you start cutting away at those parts of the body, that's a downward spiral. The things just don't ever really get better. And so that was a really exciting moment for us to realize that he wouldn't have to go through that surgery. So it's quite compelling.
Wow. And I wonder how many young people or adults are seeing a conventional doctor who's saying, you need to have this surgery, and they don't know any better. So they schedule the surgery, they go under the knife, and it is a downward spiral from there.
Absolutely. And a lot of it is because there's no real treatment for it from the conventional sense. I mean, you can try to mitigate some of the symptoms by utilizing steroids, immunosuppressants, but you really can't stop the progression of the disease. And when it comes down to it, you start to realize that, wait a minute, colitis really is a disease where our own immune system within the gut is attacking our own commensal bacteria. Mm-hmm. There's nothing bad that's come in from the outside. There's no invading species or infective organisms, and it isn't some genetic defect that we're suffering through. It's a miscommunication between the microbes in the gut, in the intestinal tract, and the immune system that's right there as well. And that miscommunication has led to friendly fire. And that friendly fire can cause this debilitating disease. So just getting that understanding really helps us to try to put the intestine back into its most healthy state, the way nature intended it.
I bet that friendly fire is at the root of a lot of health problems, isn't it?
It is, autoimmunity, we call it, right? So autoimmunity is probably one of the growing bodies of diseases there are. So I remember speaking on autoimmunity maybe about 8-9 years ago. At that time, there were somewhere around 80, 85 identified autoimmune diseases. Today, right now, there's over 100. So there more and more we're seeing these conditions come on board, and we're starting to realize, well, it's just our body attacking itself at the wrong place at the wrong time, and we really have to try to figure out what the common trigger is between all of these hundreds of conditions now.
Does psoriasis fall under that category?
It does, yeah. Psoriasis, eczema does as well, and even things that we traditionally wouldn't have thought of, but type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, these are all kind of starting to fall under the category of autoimmunity, especially type 1 diabetes. We know that, and that can get set up a couple of years after you're born. But the number of conditions that are now falling under that umbrella is quite alarming.
Well, Kiran, let's back up a little bit here. And can you give us a broad understanding, kind of lay the foundation for our understanding of the form and function of the human microbiome, what's going on in our bodies?
Yeah, so the microbiome is a popular term, and people say it a lot. So I think it's important to define it. The microbiome is the microbes, the totality of microbes, and all of their genetic elements. That becomes an important point, and I'll describe why, and how they interact with the host, which is us, our human body, and all of the microbes that live in and on us. So there's microbes virtually everywhere in our body. The vast majority of them are in our digestive tract, everywhere from the mouth down to your bottom. But we have microbes everywhere. We have microbes in our eyes. We have microbes in our organs, in our urogenital tract, in our lungs, and everywhere else, in our skin, of course. And these microbes, more and more, we're coming to find out, play a significant role in how the body itself functions. So I think to really understand the role of the microbes in how the body functions, we have to kind of redefine what a human is, right? So we used to define a human as a collection of organ systems, a brain, a heart, a lung, a liver, all of those connected by vascular tissue and neurological tissue and muscles and tendons and so on. Now there's a new definition. It's called a holobiome. A holobiome is something called a superorganism. What we are is really a walking, talking rainforest. We are a collection of thousands of different organisms that have to communicate effectively with one another in order to perpetuate the health of the overall species. And we're coming to find out more and more about that. For example, the bacteria within your gut can dictate the types of bacteria that exist in your skin, which then dictate the health of your skin in cases of eczema, atopic dermatitis, acne, and so on. So that communication between the gut, the skin, and then the skin and the immune system is what breaks down when you end up having skin conditions like eczema, atopic dermatitis, acne, and so on. So the ecology within the gut itself plays a significant role in controlling the communication with all the rest of the body.
This is so fascinating. Basically, there is so much more to us than our heart, lungs, muscles, bones, right? You're saying that there's this whole system. Like, it's almost like we used to perceive our bodies as the solar system, one sun and 9 planets, right? But now we know they're like galaxies and micro galaxies and nano galaxies. I don't even know the names of all the galaxies, but there's so much more happening here. That's why we're so complex. We're not just a walking bunch of organs, but we are a whole colony of various bacteria, right?
We are, so if you look at, it's about 10 trillion cells that make up the entire human body, whereas we have over 100 trillion bacteria cells that live in and on it. So we are 10 times more bacteria than human when it comes to cell count. And even more alarming than that is, our chromosomes have about 22,000 genes in them. And the 22,000 genes cannot code for even a fraction of all of the biochemical reactions that we conduct on a daily basis as humans. In fact, we have over 3.3 million microbial genes in and on our system that we use to conduct almost 99% of all our biochemical functions. So, what we used to think of as being human, the organ system, our DNA and our chromosomes, all of that accounts for less than 1% of who we actually are. The rest of the 99% we've been ignoring all this time until now.
Oh, that's
we're just starting to chip away at that.
Yeah. And so how does this relate to how our digestive system functions?
So our digestive system is really kind of the ground zero for not only, obviously, digestion, but how the rest of the body functions, how the rest of the organ systems function. So if you imagine the digestive tract has around 100 trillion organisms in there, and it's actually thousands and thousands of little microecologies. So every different section of the digestive tract, the some odd feet of intestinal tract, every few inches is like a slightly different ecology. You have different types of bacteria living there. The environment might be slightly different. If you look at the cross-section of the intestines, when you look at the lumen or the mucosa or the epithelial layer, which is a cell layer, each of those layers are slightly different with the types of organisms that live there. So really, you have to think of your digestive tract as this massive environment with thousands of small ecologies that all communicate and work together. And that becomes the ground zero for how your body responds to the world around you, whether it's food coming in or it's the chemicals and things like that you're exposed to on your daily basis. 80% of your immune system is set up in the gut itself. And that part of the immune system dictates how the rest of the body's immune system will function. And the messages that you get and build up in the gut are the messages that are sent out to all the other tissues and organ systems within the body.
So this includes the mind, right? So if we're feeling down, we might not just be in a bad mood because we got a flat tire. It may be that something is not right in our digestive tract.
Absolutely, yeah. It all starts with the digestive tract. So even, there's a strong connection between the gut and the brain. So the gut has a nervous system called the enteric nervous system that lines basically every inch of your intestinal tract, everything starting from your mouth all the way down to your bottom. And there are actually more nerve endings in your intestinal tract than in your brain itself. Mm. So it's a really, really concentrated set of nerve tissues. Now, what's crazy about that is those all get dumped into something called the vagus nerve that can then send messages directly up to the brain. Now, the microbes within your gut have a lot of control over that nervous system and that vagus nerve and can actually send messages up to your brain. So they can control how your brain functions in many different ways. It can be as simple as food cravings. Mm-hmm. You have a sweet tooth or a food craving of some sort. A lot of times those are microbes within your gut that are sending the messages up your vagus nerve to make you eat the types of foods they want you to eat. Or it can be stress and anxiety and depression, because we count on our gut, a healthy gut, to make all of the positive hormones like serotonin, dopamine, the brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is really important for calming the brain down and dealing with stress. These are all things that the healthy microbiome would be making. If your microbiome in your gut is not healthy, you're not making those at high levels. And you're also making things like ammonia or D-lactate that could actually be causing leaky brain, inflammation in the head, and actually cause more nervousness, anxiety, and so on. So absolutely, when you think about all the different things that can go wrong in your day and all the different things that can go wrong with your body, the central control system for virtually everything is in the gut.
When you talked about craving sugar, for example, I know some people tend to think that they are simply weak-willed when they reach for that donut or for the candy bar, when in actuality, there is something deeper at play here, something that's going on in their gut that is calling for that sugar. It's not so much that they're weak-willed, but they're following some of the direction that the gut is calling for, but this is the unhealthy bacteria that's calling for it, right?
Exactly, yeah, and it could be unhealthy bacteria, or it could be even things like candida. It could be yeast. Yeast definitely like sugar, so when they're overgrown, they'll try to send signals up to your body, up your brain, to make you crave that sugar itself. So, and who would have thought your knee pain from rheumatoid arthritis had anything to do with your gut? But it does. One of the best ways to treat rheumatoid and other joint pain that are completely distal away from the gut is to actually start fixing the gut itself. And there's one thing that I always talk about quite a bit, and it's leaky gut. And we now know that leaky gut, and the scientific term for that is barrier dysfunction or intestinal permeability, but it's more commonly known as leaky gut. That really is the driver for virtually every chronic illness that we know of. There was a 2015 review paper that did an analysis on a lot of the studies involved that have shown this leaky gut to be such a potent driver of disease, that they concluded that intestinal permeability was the number one cause of mortality worldwide.
Wow.
Because it's at the foundation of virtually every chronic disease we suffer from. And that's everything that people know very well of, like heart disease, diabetes, Alzheimer's, cancers, autoimmunity, and so on. All of those things are driven by disruption in how your intestinal lining works. That's why I always call it the ground zero of every health disorder, because there's two things to keep in mind here. Number one is you really can't completely treat any given health condition without treating the gut as well. And you can also look to the gut in most cases as a source for why that condition is present in the first place. And those are the two things that people really need to wrap their head around. And now what's great about it is there's a lot of integrative medicine, functional medicine practitioners and doctors that are really understanding this and really taking it to heart and utilizing in practice. So I think they're going to start seeing much better disease outcomes. We just need to get, traditional medicine over to understanding it a little bit better as well.
Coming up, Kiran tells us what he thinks it'll take to get traditional medicine to better understand how all disease stems from gut dysfunction. He also discusses why he believes the vast majority of probiotic pills that we take are unhelpful. That's right, get ready for a paradigm shift on the efficacy of probiotic pills. We want to pause now and thank our sponsors, New Trends Publishing, home of nourishing traditions and other wonderful books on diet and health. Go to newtrendspublishing.com. Hey, and have you seen the Nourishing Traditions Cookbook for Children? The youngsters in your family will love this spiral-bound, fully illustrated version of Nourishing Traditions. It's available at bookstores, online booksellers, and at newtrendspublishing.com. Hey, and when you go to newtrendspublishing.com, keep in mind that case orders are 50% off. And the Weston A. Price Foundation. Did you know that this podcast is supported by the foundation? To keep it going, we need your support. Please become a member to ensure that we can continue to offer this valuable content for free. So join now. It's only $30 for a membership in the U.S., which is basically the equivalent of 8 cents a day. So go to westonaprice.org and join now. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Kiran, why is that not happening? What's holding traditional medicine back from understanding this? Since there have been recent studies that are indicating that all diseases start in the gut, as you're saying. What's it going to take for traditional medicine to switch over?
And the unfortunate answer to that question is it's probably going to take a drug. And in working with doctors all the time, one of the things I realized that if you're just a straight allopathic doctor, knowing this information doesn't quite help you that much because you don't really have the training or the background understanding to help people fix their gut. right? They don't really understand nutrition. They don't utilize nutrition in practice. They don't really understand the microbiome and how it can be favored or unfavored. What they will need is a drug that's a microbiome drug. So that's when you'll get the vast majority of allopathic practitioners that really start to be able to utilize the power of the microbiome. Until then, you really have to look for those that have taken it upon themselves to learn a completely new science. And I see these docs. I mean, they are at numerous conferences a year, listening to lectures, getting certifications, reading papers, and just kind of bringing themselves up to speed on these things, because the treatments, when you start looking at the microbiome, aren't so simple. It isn't one pill for one condition, right, which is what traditional medicine is set up like.
Yeah.
The gut is a complicated thing, and there's a number of things that you have to understand about it, and a number of things that you have to start doing from a lifestyle, dietary, supplement standpoint to really affect the gut.
Because you said, like, every inch along the intestines, tell me if I'm getting this right, but, every inch, it's almost like another world, right? There's another group of bacteria, a different, habitat, if you will. And so how can one pill address all those?
Right, and that's why you'll never find it. I go to a lot of these conferences, so I think I went to about 50 conferences last year, and probably will be doing more this year. And there are microbiome medicine conferences where drug companies are trying to develop treatments based on utilizing the power of the microbiome. But, like traditional pharmaceuticals, what they're looking is to block some natural action or enhance some natural action without really looking at the whole system. So I think it's going to be a while before we actually see any prescription drugs that fit that category. However, I'll say this. Now, we work with probiotics that have been prescription drugs in Europe, Asia, and Latin America since 1958. Mm-hmm. So the drug companies there have realized that certain types of probiotic strains actually have the capability of getting in there and doing a multitude of things that we hope to do and wish we could do within the gut. And they've been utilizing these particular strains as prescription-based probiotics since 1958.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that just now. I was thinking, okay, so you're saying it's going to take some time, if ever, that we could find a drug that would address these things. And I thought, well, some of my friends take probiotic pills, and I do on occasion as well, hoping that it can help heal whatever may be amiss or, rectify whatever needs rectifying in my gut. Is that effective? Is that helpful?
It's really, really dependent on the strain itself, on the type of probiotic. What we tend to find, and I started researching probiotics about 10 years ago as a microbiologist and from a microbiologist perspective. And what I find is that the vast majority of probiotics are really just kind of dead bacteria passing through your gut. Most of them don't survive through the harsh acid environment of the stomach. Even if you do make it past the harsh acid environment, they don't necessarily survive through the bile salts, which is a really strong antimicrobials, then pancreatic enzymes, and then once they finally get into the gut, they have to compete with 100 trillion other guys that are sitting around there who are optimized for existing in that environment, right? So it's a really difficult task for most probiotic bacteria that you find at your local stores and so on to get into the gut and cause an effective change. The other problem is the philosophy behind probiotics has been a little skewed. When we're born, we get the vast majority of the bacteria that live in our gut. We get it passing through the birth canal, breastfeeding from mom, close interaction with mom and dad, and other family members as well. And usually around 838 days after birth, that's about 2.5 years after birth, you've established kind of your own microbiome. No two individuals in the world have the same exact microbiome. That's the most unique thing about you. Even if you were born as an identical twin, identical twins have 100% same genetics, yet their microbiomes can be upwards of 30% different.
Wow.
And that's the most unique thing about us. And so no two individuals have the same microbiome. All of the lactobacillus and bifidobacter strains you're ever going to have living in your microbiome are already there and kind of set from the ages around 2 or 3. So the traditional probiotic, the idea has been, well, let's try to reseed the gut with these kind of conventional strains that we know are commensal organisms.
Mm-hmm.
So they grow up the strains in factories and then reintroduce them in capsules, and you take them every day. The problem with it is because your gut is already completely unique to you, and you have your own unique distribution of over 1,000 different bacterial species within your gut, there is no indication that those 10, 15 strains in that particular probiotic even belong in your gut. And, even if they can get there and get to the site of action and colonize, we don't really know if they should be there, because your gut is completely unique to you.
Almost like in a park where they have invasive species. Like you bring plants from another country and stick them in the Northeast, and they're like, wait, they don't really grow here. They shouldn't really be here. That's kind of what you're saying.
Absolutely. And then there's ecological examples of that all over the world, right? Whether it's plants or animals, they do the same thing. So, the question is, are these factory-grown probiotic strains, are they the ones that belong within your gut? And the latest understanding of the microbiome is that no, because your gut is actually completely unique to you. It's almost impossible for you to ever figure out exactly what is growing in your gut. And then it's almost impossible for you to figure out exactly what species you are low in. Let's say you're taking a probiotic that has Lactobacillus acidophilus in it. That's the main strain. Maybe there's 10 billion CFUs in there. We don't know that you are actually low in acidophilus. There's no way to really tell. You can do a stool test, but stool tests tend to be very inaccurate and inconsistent from test to test. And anytime you do a stool test, you're really only testing a small portion of your stool, not your entire digestive tract, right? So we don't know if acidophilus will help you or if in the long run it's going to hurt you. And what we do know, and I bring up acidophilus specifically because there's some indication now with the study that's being done out of University in California, is that the number one issue, or at least one of the big issues with people who are suffering from Crohn's, is they tend to have an overabundance of Lactobacillus acidophilus, which also is the number one selling probiotic strain in the country and has been for probably 30 or 40 years. So are we actually messing up the gut by unnaturally adding these strains in large amounts to our system on a daily basis?
Wow, that's a great question.
Yeah, and I always ask the question, I say, when I look at whether or not we should be doing certain things, especially nutritionally, I look to see did humans as a species do that during the course of evolution. And when you look at the course of evolution over the last 3 to 5 million years, where did our ancestors get 10, 20, 30 billion CFUs of bifidobacteria and lactobacillus in a enteric-coated capsule that's refrigerated, and kept on ice to make it stable and so on a daily basis? We just didn't get that. Once we establish our microbiome, the rest of our life, we are exposed to microbes within the environment. So now it brings us to, well, what kind of microbes can actually act as a probiotic? Well, there are numerous microbes within the environment that we've been exposed to throughout the course of human evolution. Our hunter-gatherer foraging ancestors ate a lot of them every day because they ate dirt, basically, and we didn't live in a sanitized world, so we had a number of these microbes around us. And some of these microbes have developed the natural capability to survive through the gastric system, get into the gut, and act as the gut police. So when you start to learn all of the things that these bacteria do for you in your gut, it really starts to blow your mind that, oh my God, this would be the equivalent of 50 different prescription drugs in terms of its effects within the gut itself.
So, Kiran, what would you recommend that a person do then if they wanted to repopulate their gut with healthy bacteria?
Yeah, so the best way to repopulate your gut is to actually eat a really diverse diet, right? So you have to imagine that your gut has a lot of different species in there already. And when we talk about repopulate, we have this false idea of bringing in bacteria from the outside and reintroducing it to change the microbiome. What we really are talking about is actually creating a condition in the gut that favors the growth of more and more diverse set of bacteria. Now, these bacteria are there, but they've been suppressed because of our lifestyle, our diet, and so on. So we now have an imbalance. We have an overgrowth of certain types of bacteria and a complete undergrowth of others. So really the idea is, how do we get an increased growth of all of the good beneficial bacteria? There's two good ways of doing that. Number one is to increase the diversity of your diet, meaning take in more and more different sources of macronutrients. Don't eat just one type of root vegetable, eat 2 or 3 or 4 different types of root vegetables, eating different types of complex carbohydrates, healthy fats, proteins, increasing the diversity of the diet. Anthropological studies show that our ancestors ate somewhere around 600 different types of foods a year. A healthy Westerner maybe eats 15 or 20. So the diversity in our diet is really poor. If we improve the diversity of our diet, we can improve the diversity and growth of beneficial bacteria in our gut quite significantly as well. And then the other thing would be to utilize a spore-based probiotic. That we work with these spore-based probiotics, and what we see is they have the capability of going in and acting as police in the gut. They can actually suppress the growth of bad bacteria, and then they will actually enhance the growth of your good bacteria within your gut and try to help improve the diversity within the gut itself. And overall, they reduce inflammation and that leakiness. I talked about earlier the leaky gut condition. The spores of the first probiotics have been shown in a clinical trial to actually halt that leakiness within the gut.
Can you tell us one more story of someone who made some of these changes that you recommended and saw their health improve?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the patients in the clinic that I work with, she had been suffering with psoriasis on 80% of her body for about 18 years, So there was a number of things that we had done or the doctor had done in that clinic to try to help control it to some degree. But imagine somebody that has psoriasis lesions all over her body except for her face.
Wow.
And so she basically covered up her entire body every day for the last 18 years because, it's unsightly and she's embarrassed by it, not to mention it being a real nuisance as well. And so what we did is we started expanding the diet, adding in some fermented foods as well. There's some good fermented extracts out there. And then adding the spore-based probiotics. Within the first about 4 or 5 months, she started really noticing some of those lesions going away. And then I would say about 8 months after starting the regimen, she noticed about 60-70% of her psoriasis lesions were going away. And at the end of it all, within about a year of therapy, she had the vast majority of it gone away, and she was always joking that it'd be the first summer in 18 years that she was going to be in a bathing suit.
Oh my.
Which is a huge impact, to people's lives. So it just goes to show you how attacking the gut and trying to improve the fertility of the microbiome, the expansiveness of the microbiome, reducing the leakiness and the inflammation in the gut, how that can have such a huge impact on the rest of your body, even your skin.
Most definitely. Well, I'm so grateful we've had this conversation. I have one more question to ask you, Kiran. If the listener could only do one thing to improve their health, what would you recommend that they do?
I would go with the words of the father of medicine, Hippocrates. Hippocrates said in 400 BC that death sits in the bowels and bad digestion is the root of all disease. And so focusing on your gut health, that's really the key. Really understanding that when you're eating food, you're not just feeding you as a human, you're feeding trillions of microbes within the gut. And those microbes, the good ones, actually like healthier foods. Remember, as a species, we evolved eating healthy foods, organic, natural. These were all, before they were buzz terms, this was just food, right, around us. And that's what our microbes in our gut have evolved eating as well. So now we throw in all these strange processed foods, we totally throw off that balance within the gut, and we create an unfavorable environment for all the good microbes. So go back to traditional eating and feed your microbiome healthy, nutritious food, the kind of food that it evolved to consume.
Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been fascinating. We appreciate you and are thankful for your coming by today.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me.
My guest today was Kiran Krishnan. For a summary of our talk and links to studies referred to in today's conversation, along with a YouTube link of a recent talk Kiran gave at the Autism One conference last May, go to westinaprice.org. Click on the menu bar that says Blogs and Podcasts, get to the Wise Traditions podcast page, and click on the show notes for episode 69. Hey, and a big thank you to my friends at Podcast Village. They offer their recording and editing support that's invaluable. Check them out at podcastvillage.com. And if you're still listening, I've got to tell you, We have almost as many reviews on iTunes as we have episodes. In other words, this is episode 69 and we have 67 reviews. Can you help take us over the top? I would love to have more reviews than episodes in the bank. If you're enjoying the show, do me a favor and go to iTunes and rate and review Wise Traditions. The more reviews we have, the more likely we are to attract new listeners. Thanks so much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with others. Post a link on Facebook or Twitter, or send a link to a friend in an email, or simply review Wise Traditions on iTunes. Sharing the podcast is one way to spread the important message of health through nutrition. Wise Traditions is brought to you by the Weston A. Price Foundation for Wise Traditions in Food, Farming, and the Healing Arts. The content of this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for medical advice.